Hello dear Motorsport-Magazin.com friends and Formula One fans. After the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps, the race didn't quite live up to its promise for a long time. Somehow a strange race, but then at the end it got really exciting again. A duel between the Mercedes drivers for victory. Who would have thought it? Fred Vasseur summed it up wonderfully. On Friday morning, he would have thought that Max Verstappen would win the thing despite the grid penalty. On Friday afternoon, he thought McLaren would drive it home easily. Then a Ferrari was on pole and Mercedes celebrated a 1-2 victory, a symbol of the season. But what happened afterwards was also a symbol of the season. Double victory, we can cross that out. It was a Mercedes victory for Lewis Hamilton because George Russell lost his victory as he was disqualified. You could tell from Toto Wolff's reactions that something wasn't right. In fact, it became known relatively quickly that Russell's Mercedes was underweight. The cars are weighed after the race and must then weigh 798 kilograms together with the driver. The Mercedes with the starting number 63 has that to begin with, but exactly 798 kilograms, and then the FIA gets a bit suspicious because you always include a bit of a safety margin and the car with driver but without fuel. The FIA always sees exactly how much the teams and the individual drivers use in the race. The teams also have to state beforehand how the cars were refueled, so you already know that there's still a bit left in the tank. The teams usually calculate with a bit of a safety margin. Usually there are 3 liters left. 1 liter has to be left for the sample anyway, for the fuel sample that can be taken. Yes, then you looked to see what was left in the tank and then you quickly pumped out 2.8 liters. I say quickly because you could have pumped out a bit more, but that would have been very time consuming, but you didn't have to because that was already enough. You put it on the scales again with the 2.8 liters pumped out, and then you only weighed 796.5 kilograms, so 1.5 kilograms too little. The whole thing was officially reported at 1750, then there was another hearing, but the decision was made relatively quickly. At 1848, Russell was disqualified, but how can that actually happen in modern Formula One? Probably it's not confirmed, it's because Russell drove a different strategy. You've seen it, we'll talk about it in a moment. One-stop strategy, he drove from lap 10 to 44 on one set, and the special thing is, of course, a tire like that loses rubber. It's like at home. After a few years you have to put new tires on because the tread depth gets shallower. In Formula One, there's no tread on the slicks, but they also shed rubber, and that's the difference, as we often try to explain, between tire wear, which is really wear, where the rubber becomes less, and degradation, where the tire slows down. They have not slowed down that much, we'll talk about that in a moment, but they have worn out, and that's actually quite a lot. This is also why the drivers still drive next to the racing line on the final lap, to be able to collect the mables, these rubber roots, to then put weight back on them. Now there is a specialty here at Spa. The track is so long that the R lap is omitted, which is why the cars enter the pit lane the wrong way round immediately after passing the reins, and you can't collect any pickup rubbers, which was probably George Russell's downfall. It's not the first time. Robert Kubica, his first race ever in Formula One in 2006 in Budapest, 7th place, was disqualified, probably because he didn't collect enough pickup rubber. Of course, there's more wear than just the tires, but the wear is perhaps 200-300 grams, and you can't miscalculate that much. Underbody, yes, but that's only grams more. So we assume at the moment that it was probably the rubber that was missing. Bitter, because that actually brought victory for Russell, but how did the Mercedes resurrection come about in the first place? We all expected it to be completely different. Hamilton said, yes, if the race is dry, which was forecast, and as it was, then it will be a disaster again. That was just the rain qualifying, in which it went quite well. And then, lo and behold, Hamilton passes Leclerc on the track. After the mixed Friday, Mercedes re-equipped the car and removed the updates, but then no longer had the opportunity to test the car in the dry, which means they really went into this race Sunday relatively blind. But we didn't just remove the updates, we also made some changes to the mechanical setup. We have already discussed the new asphalt this weekend. The simulator was of course fed with the additional data, and yes, suddenly it was much better. Especially the tire degradation. Russell had perhaps even expected a 3-stop strategy, and he actually managed to get through with 1 stop. The drivers said it really was a night and day difference from Friday to Sunday. Hamilton says that in fresh air it felt so good, like in the simulator. So why didn't it work out for Hamilton? He took the lead and was obviously really fast, but Russell won because Russell was only at the stop once, even though he thought it was going to be a 3-stop race. Yes, Russell was able to gamble. Russell was actually in 7th position before the pit stop started, and he even opened the whole thing up on lap 10 at the front of the leading group. Hamilton was always sparking. The tires were still good. Well, Mercedes didn't dare to risk Hamilton's victory by leaving him out. With George Russell, you could take the risk and it paid off. The two only really came together again in the last 2 laps. You could see that overtaking wasn't that easy. We'll talk about that in a moment. And Mercedes almost had to make a steep move, or a team strategy if you like, because Oscar Piastri was still coming up from behind and they were afraid that he would pass them both. But Hamilton was faster at that point, logically on the fresh tires, and then he could have actually passed Russell. Russell would have tried to cover Piastri a bit, fend him off, take time away, but that didn't happen, and Russell won the race for the time being. Mercedes is and remains a miracle bag. Even for us, it's difficult to make predictions. Just read the current print edition, issue number 97, Comeback of the Superpowers, and Mercedes plays a special role in history, abo.motorsport-magazine.com. What was going on with McLaren? Yes, Lando Norris, he messed up the race in turn 1, got a bit wide, wanted to stay out of everything, then got a bit stuck in the gravel, so he dropped back from 4th to 7th position, which was bad for him. Oscar Piastri overshot slightly at the pit stop, lost about 2 seconds in the end. The 2 seconds might have been enough to win, but he says probably not. He would probably have found it difficult to overtake and would only have finished 3rd anyway. Actually, the McLaren pace was good, but we didn't really make any progress, and overtaking was much more difficult today than initially assumed. The wind was going in the other direction. We had a bit of a tailwind on the Chemnitz trail, so the slipstream effect is obviously a bit less. Then this year we got the DRS zone shortened, 75 meters shorter, and I've already said it, tire degradation was significantly less, which means that the time you lose with older tires was significantly less, and therefore the differences between the tires depending on their age were also less than originally assumed, and that's why it was all much more difficult than initially predicted. Red Bull didn't take the grid penalty here for nothing. They thought it would be easy, but then it wasn't so easy. So in the end, for the McLaren drivers, Piastri 3rd place, Norris 6th place, once again with a mistake. There would have been much more possible. 1 place was gained in the end due to the disqualification, but of course we had hoped for much more. Red Bull had perhaps also hoped for much more. They don't quite want to admit it. Max Verstappen finished 5th. He is, of course, talking about damage limitation. That was his premise, damage limitation. He has further extended his championship lead because Norris finished behind him. Red Bull had 2 problems. On the one hand, race pace, which was once again not really great. We had already mentioned yesterday that the Red Bull is now significantly better on 1 lap this season than in the race trim. He says that a one-stop strategy would almost not have been possible for him, Max Verstappen, because that was the big question. Why didn't everyone go for this one-stop strategy? Hamilton kept hinting at it. Mercedes didn't dare. Russell said of his own accord that he wanted it. With others, there were only a few drivers in the field who still tried it. Of the top drivers, it was only Russell. With Red Bull, you clarify that it would have been close, and with the 2-stop strategy, there was still the problem that you only had 1 set of hard tires. But the hard tire was clearly better today than the medium tire. Yes, the egg in the nest was already laid on Friday in practice because you took the tires like that. Sergio Perez started the race from 2nd on the grid, only finished 8th in the end. Not the optimal strategy. Yes, is that enough or not enough? The Red Bull in race trim really isn't very good, but to drop so far back, difficult. On Monday, there will be the first crisis meeting in Milton Keynes with Dr. Helmut Marko and Christian Horner. Helmut Marko and with Christian Horner, and then we will see how things will continue after the summer break. There will be film days and TPC tests at AlphaTauri or at the Racing Bulls. There will be a bit of experimentation. You can definitely check in with us over the next few days to see if there is any official news. Until then, be sure to follow this channel and ask questions to our experts, to Christian Danner, under the hashtag AskAVD. If you are lucky, the questions will be answered tomorrow in the AVD Motorsport magazine.